Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, pursuant to our standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room, and we are all in the room today. Please wait till I recognize you before speaking. And if you're not, we're not on Zoom, so we can go through, dispense with those comments. And now get into our study, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here and for waiting for us to do our duty voting in the House. Pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, June 6, 2023, the committee resumes its study of the use of federal government research and development grants, funds, and contributions by Canadian universities and research institutes in partnerships with entities connected to the People's Republic of China. It's my pleasure now to welcome our witnesses today from Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. We have Alejandro Adem, and we have Manal Bubeshi, and we also have Canadian Institutes of Health Research. We have Christian Baron, Vice President of Research Programs, and Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. We have Ted Hewitt back, and good to see you, Ted, and Valerie Latraverse, Vice President of Corporate Affairs, and Valerie Laflamme, Associate Vice President of TIPS. You'll each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we can get right into that now, starting with NSERC, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alejandro Adem. I am the President of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, our country's federal funding agency for university and college-based research in the natural sciences and engineering. Thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today to discuss this critical issue. Protecting the integrity of our research system is critical for our country's continued prosperity, especially with advancements in critical areas like artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. Le SRSR prend très au sérieux la protection de l'écosystème.
This includes protecting the research ecosystem in Canada. We need to take all of the necessary steps to protect our research. We're delighted that Minister Champagne has taken the initiative in advancing this important priority, as well as the broad support received from other members of Parliament and policymakers across the Government of Canada. Research security is a shared responsibility that requires a coordinated approach across all stakeholders. We have been able to move swiftly because of this unified support. Striking the balance between research that is open and secure requires thoughtful implementation, and we have every indication so far that we're moving in the right direction.
Other partners in the Government of Canada, the granting agencies continue to work with the university community to provide resources, tools, and training for researchers and institutions to build their knowledge and capacity for research security. These resources are made available through Canada's Safeguarding Your Research web portal. Since July 2021, NSERC furthered its commitment to research security by implementing the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships in NSERC's flagship Research Partnerships Program, Alliance. Following these guidelines, researchers and institutions seeking to partner with a private sector organization must complete a risk assessment form to identify potential risks and provide an appropriate risk mitigation plan. If the grant is funded, this mitigation plan must be implemented for the duration of the grant. The information researchers have provided demonstrates that they have developed a strong understanding of the risks associated with their research and with their partners. As a result, the risks to research security for the vast majority of applications, in fact 96%, have been low and appropriately mitigated. The remaining 4% of applications are those where NSERC required expert advice from Canada's national security departments and agencies to inform our funding decision. In many cases, the advice received is that the risks are well mitigated. Accordingly, NSERC has funded these grants. NSERC remains steadfast in our efforts to ensure the research we fund benefits Canada. We do not fund grants where we are advised that the research partnership poses an unmitigable risk to national security. Nous nous réjouissons de la nouvelle orientation stratégique améliorée.
We also recognize and welcome the enhanced policy direction requested in February 2023 regarding our most sensitive technology research areas and affiliations with universities, research institutes, and labs connected to military, national defense, or state security entities of foreign state actors that pose a risk to Canada's national security. At the same time, we must bear in mind that collaboration is an essential part of advancing the aims of the research we fund. This is why, in parallel to our research security commitments, NSERC has continued to foster international initiatives that support an open and connected research ecosystem.
Joint initiative with science funders in the US, UK, and Australia as part of the National Science Foundation Global Centers to tackle climate change and clean energy challenges. Established a new relationship with the National Research Agency in France, and issued a special international funding opportunity in support of Canada's National Quantum Strategy. We have also benefited greatly from the perspectives of these international partners, bilaterally and through multilateral dialogues such as the Five Eyes, the G7, and the Global Research Council, as concerns about research security are shared by funding agencies around the world. Most notably, Canada co-chairs the G7 Working Group on the Security and Integrity of the Global Research Ecosystem, SIGRE, which published a set of guiding principles on research security last year. NSERC adheres to these principles. As the leading supporter of discovery and innovation in this country, NSERC's vision remains focused on supporting our researchers today so Canadians benefit tomorrow. Along with the important standards we've introduced to address research security risks, we must continue to foster our young talent and give them the means to pursue their research goals in Canada to ensure that our homegrown discoveries and innovations reach Canadians fast and first. Je vous remercie de nous avoir invités.
Thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to appear here today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and right on time. And now we'll move to Canadian Institutes of Health Research, please.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens à remercier le comité en premier temps pour...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to appear before you today and for drawing attention to an important topic for the research ecosystem in Canada. At CIHR, we recognize and value the importance of academic freedom, openness, and international research collaboration in making the groundbreaking discoveries that improve lives. We all know that health threats we face are increasingly global in nature, and that the health and well-being of Canadians is intertwined and dependent on the well-being of people everywhere.
We must continue working with colleagues around the world to leverage our shared knowledge and resources we find so that we find solutions for all. To advance this global research agenda, CHR currently has 40 international initiatives supported by agreements with countries around the world. For example, this includes the European Union's Joint Programme on Neurodegenerative Diseases Research, which is the largest global health research initiative aimed at tackling the challenge of neurodegenerative diseases that is aimed at funding causes, developing cures, and better ways of care. As part of the work that your committee is currently conducting, CHR has 2 active partnerships with the People's Republic of China. They are managed through the National Natural Science Foundation of China, or the NFSC, whose mandate is to support basic research and free exploration, identify and foster scientific talents, as well as to promote progress in science and technology. The first agreement presents a 5-year, $12.2 million investment, of which $6.4 million is provided by the NFSC to the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases Call for Research on Mental Health. Through this particular initiative, 7 research teams have been funded over a period of 5 years. As an example, this includes a team led by Dr. Brian Mishara at Université du Québec à Montréal, who developed a project on a World Health Organization intervention program for people who have experienced suicide attempts, in parallel with projects in Ningxia, China, and among the Inuit in Nunavut, Canada. This study is only one example of how international research can help us to understand how interventions work in different contexts. The second partnership is to support the Healthy Life Trajectories Canada-China team in collaboration with the NFSC and the World Health Organization to address the increasing rates of obesity, particularly among youth. This partnership was renewed in 2022 with a $2.5 million investment from China, with matching funding from CHR. This international approach enables the sharing of expertise, the comparative analysis of interventions, the harmonization of data, and the assessment of biological mechanisms in different populations, all of which contribute to delivering greater impact to comparisons to single-country projects. While these global health initiatives have great potential to improve health, the globalization of research has also made us more vulnerable to threats from entities of concern. This is why, given the shared responsibility of creating a vigilant while open and collaborative ecosystem, we have been working closely with our federal partners, with national security agencies, academic institutions, and researchers to protect Canada's research investment. In addition to the critical tri-agency work my colleagues have described, CHR has implemented a new requirement as part of its strategic fund opportunities for applicants to describe the role of all applicant partners and how they will be involved and contribute to research-related activities. And as part of this process, risk and conflicts of interest are apparently explained if applicable. Le plan stratégique des IRSC fixe des objectifs ambitieux à atteindre d'ici 2031 pour
CIHR's strategic plan sets out ambitious goals to be achieved by 2031 to ensure that Canadian health research is recognized as inclusive, collaborative, transparent, culturally sensitive, and focused on tangible benefits. In alignment with this commitment, CIHR is working to enhance national and international collaboration to address global challenges and facilitate the pooling of expertise and sharing of infrastructure. In closing, research security in our rapidly evolving ecosystem is a shared responsibility between government and academic institutions for which the importance cannot be overstated. We must continue to work together to strike a balance between openness and security to protect our research. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Merci.
On this panel, over to SSHRC, Mr. Hewitt, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis très heureux d'être ici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues.
All of us in the room agree that science and research have become more important than ever in the current environment, as economic, environmental, and social challenges have become as serious as they are complex, and expanding knowledge across all disciplines is foundational to innovation and to finding solutions that will enhance health, combat climate change, and drive economic and social prosperity. Le SRSR joue un rôle clé dans l'écosystème.
SSHRC plays a key role in Canada's research ecosystem as the federal agency that supports research and talent in the humanities and social sciences, and as the agency that administers a number of prestigious national programs, such as the Canada Research Chairs Program, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, among several others, on behalf of the 3 federal research funding agencies.
Recognizes the crucial need to protect Canadian research from risks such as theft, foreign interference, or the unwanted transfer of knowledge. And we've been collaborating with government partners and consulting with the research community to develop and implement the national security guidelines for research partnerships. Following the February 2023 statement by the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Minister of Health, we are also contributing to the development of a new interdepartmental policy on sensitive technology, research, and affiliations of concern. Pour aider la communauté de recherche,
to help the research community meet these requirements, last fiscal year we began providing $125 million over 5 years to Canadian institutions through the Research Support Fund to help them enhance research security. We also engage with the Government of Canada Universities Working Group and others in the research community to provide tools, resources, and information sessions in collaboration with the federal government. Given growing geopolitical tensions and rivalries, it's imperative that Canadian researchers have the necessary tools and knowledge to safeguard their work.
Ces travaux. However, it's also important to point out that international collaborations, including with researchers and institutions based in China, remain vital to Canada's research enterprise and provide a basis for science diplomacy. Researchers need to work together across disciplines, sectors, and borders to understand and respond to global challenges, whether it's a global pandemic or the climate crisis. And it's crucial to maintain open channels of communication between scientific communities in times of crisis and to promote collaborations in other areas of mutual interest. Par exemple, le SRSR finance.
For instance, SSHRC is currently funding a research partnership among scientists from Canada, China, Costa Rica, the U.S., Ghana, France, and other countries aimed at feeding the future human population in a just and equitable way, while also achieving biodiversity conservation and climate mitigation goals. The challenges facing Canada and the world today are frequently interconnected problems. They require that we cooperate on shared priorities while remaining vigilant about potential risks and steadfast in our efforts to protect the integrity of our research system.
This reality reinforces that the Government of Canada, the granting agencies, the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and the research community at large must all work together in this shared responsibility. Indeed, the Canadian research community comprises a vast range of experts on national security issues, science and innovation policy, and international relations. This expertise could contribute to the Government of Canada's research security efforts. Il est également de notre responsabilité.
It's also our shared responsibility to ensure security measures do not lead to discrimination against or the profiling of any member of the community, including on the basis of nationality. Mr. Chair, the granting agencies, CFI, and their federal partners will continue to work with the research community to implement research security measures. But my colleagues and I believe it's important we continue to take an evidence-based approach and look at the broader implications.
Commons unanimous motion. In May 2021, we must affirm our commitment to science, research, and evidence-informed decision-making. And in doing so, I'm confident we can better protect Canada's research ecosystem from security risks while continuing to foster international collaboration on areas of mutual interest. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. And each panel from our Research Tri-Council is right on time. Precision, we love it. Speaking of precision, we have 6 minutes for Mr. Lobb.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our guests. First question is for Mr. Hewitt, and I promise you I won't ask you about the Dolly Parton lyrics. I knew, I just always have to remind you about that, but I promise I won't ask you about that today. I just want to clarify something you said in your speech, and I want to make sure I had the numbers right because I was writing it down. Was that $125 million for security research?
Yes, it was provided to SHRC on behalf of the agencies to provide institutions with the funds they need to develop their own security measures locally.
So did that $125 million go directly to your department?
It went through our department through mechanisms that we've established that are run by Madame Flamme, who can give you more detail about that, and was distributed and is being distributed to institutions for the purpose
to the universities.
Yes, absolutely.
And then they take that money and they built a portal. Is that what they did?
They do a lot of different things, and in fact, they propose to us the kind of things that they need to do locally to meet security requirements. And then we fund them on that basis. And that can vary, as you could imagine, between institutions depending on where they're at or how far they're along in their own security their own security measures.
With this $125 million, do you work in conjunction with CSIS, the RCMP, other intelligence agencies? Is that a requirement for the funding to go to the universities, or is that given to the universities and then they decide what to do?
I'd ask Valerie to speak to that if she's able, but the point is that the money is provided to institutions based on their needs, on their understanding of what they need to do to enhance their own security measures. So it's provided on that basis. I don't believe there's any screening that occurs through security agencies to this point. Okay. So it's to help them build infrastructure in terms of what they need.
I mean, that does raise an interesting question probably for another meeting, but they were kind of, no offense to any of the universities, but they were a little naive to this anyways, so it'd be hard for maybe them to establish what they needed or didn't need. But thank you for that information. That is appreciated. Mr. Baron, in your statement, I thought you mentioned you asked about you have actively or proactively working with security agencies. Did you say that in your statement, or did I catch that wrong?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the question. Certainly, CHR, together with all the three, our colleagues from the other councils, we've worked over the last few months to establish parameters and procedures for the new security posture. This was a very interactive procedure where the three councils worked together with the national security agencies, including CSIS. It was a very collaborative, interactive process, trying to find the best solution which will protect Canadian research investments.
So my question to you is then, based on what we heard over here, is your three agencies that are here today worked with the security agencies, but then the money went to the universities, and then at that point, it's kind of hands-off. We let the universities figure out what they need. Is there the potential for a disconnect if that's what we're doing?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. The procedure is as follows. There was, in addition to the committee with the work which was done conjointly with the three councils, there was also a committee established with the universities, which was aimed at establishing and discussing the needs of universities. And based on all these considerations, including conversations at top secret level with university officials, the guidelines were established and funds were allocated to universities.
Okay. Now, do I still have time? 2 minutes. Mr. Adam and Ms. Baobeshi, the question I have for you folks, and I appreciate everybody's presentations today. The universities fill out a portal, correct? The applicants fill out, and it's your portal, or it's their portal?
With the research security guidelines,
So they read it. They read the guidelines, and then they fill out an application for their study that they'd like to do.
It's a risk assessment form they have to fill out for these grants, which are subject to that framework.
Okay, and so...
Now, if I just wanted to add that
Yes.
there is research security centers are being established across the country where there is input from the security agencies, and those are being funded. So the universities are not out on their own, and they're giving them advice as to how to do that. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, okay. So this would be the professor or the researcher that would fill out this form based on the information they would have, and then you approve the project.
Well, they have to explain how they're going to mitigate the risk from the partnership, and this only applies so far to partnerships with private entities. These are projects we have to put researchers in touch to connect them with not-for-profit and companies, right?
So have you identified PRC, military universities, colleges, known organizations and entities that would immediately eliminate them from the project being approved, or is that still a possibility that one could squeak in?
Well, we do anything which is not mitigable, and that would
Pardon
be
me?
something which cannot be mitigated, obviously mitigated. We refer it then to the security agencies because they are the experts.
How many have been referred so far?
So I think in the order of, 60 or so, which have been referred?
Any rejected?
Yes, over 30 of them have been
Okay,
rejected.
thank you.
To the end of that, that's terrific. And now over to Dr. Jasek for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. I'm going to follow up a little bit on where Mr. Lobb was going. First of all, is every application for an alliance grant subject to a risk assessment form?
That would be the ones which are partnership with private
Yes.
companies.
But of those?
All of those have to fill out the risk assessment form.
Okay. So, of those, you have now told us that some 30 were actually rejected. There was a preliminary review. 96%, I think you said originally, were approved. And then 4% got sent, and of that 4%, 30 were rejected. How many was that 4%?
As roughly half.
About half.
I think it was 34 is the number out of 62 or something like that.
And there was consultation with CSIS, with the cybersecurity,
I want to be clear. They're the ones that gave us that advice because we are not experts in security. We are an agency for funding science. It's very important for us, that relationship and that input we're getting from the security agencies. They give us their recommendation about the risk level.
Okay, so we understand that when applications are made, this is the process. Is there any retrospective of existing grants that have been given? Are you reviewing those in any way, or is this only for new applications?
Well, we follow the direction of the Government of Canada, and we have not been asked to do so.
Do you think it would be useful to look retrospectively?
I think the panorama in the world has changed over the past few years. So I don't know if it would be necessarily helpful. We want everything to be secure. From the moment this framework was established, we want complete security because we really believe that it's very important to protect Canadian science, Canadian engineers. So we should invest our time and our efforts in stopping whatever bad things from happening.
So, Dr. Adem, from NSERC's perspective, have you involved any provincial government agencies in your consultations regarding these guidelines? Was that originally part of the working group?
Well, there's this university working group. I think ICET is the one who organizes them. We are in touch with the provincial agencies. For example, the FRQ in Quebec, they contacted us wanting to know what was being developed. Also in touch with Alberta Innovates and others, because we have agreements with these provinces in funding these industry collaborations. So I think it's very important to share best practices across the whole ecosystem.
So, as I understand it, these guidelines were established in 2021. As you have just alluded to, obviously you want to look at best practice. Is there a date when these guidelines are going to be reviewed, the application risk assessment reviewed, based on what you have found, based on the experience that you've gathered in the last 2 years, or are you looking towards a specific date to review these risk assessments in the future?
Maybe my colleague?
Thank you for that question. There has been review, including on the risk assessment form, and there have been changes made to that, taking into account feedback that we received from the community to help simplify the process and make it clearer what elements of information are needed. So there is an ongoing calibration effort. That has happened, and I expect will continue to happen.
And then that review would be communicated, obviously, with our government or the federal government for potential change.
So the new risk assessment form, for example, was made public a few months ago. So it is communicated, publicly available, and shared with the research community as well.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Dr. Hewitt, the whole issue of social sciences and humanities research, I imagine it's a little more complicated than the sort of, as we've heard, military operations or anything that can be connected to a security issue. But could you maybe elaborate a little bit from the social services humanities point of view of research, what you might be looking for where there could potentially be a risk to Canadian security?
I would probably start by saying that we would follow the guidelines that we had been given and that we agreed to and we would implement. So a lot of things, as you would guess, within the social sciences, humanities would not come close to some of the screening that's being suggested in terms of organizations, particularly in the private sector, that would cause some concern. On the other hand, all of our projects, so all of our applications, like all of the agencies, always originate with Canadian researchers. They are the primary applicants. They go through rigorous peer review through committees and external reviews, number one. So if there were flags there, they may be identified in the peer review process. Whether or not we would be able to do anything about it at that point would be interesting because there may not be any mechanism to act. I would say at the other end of the scale, researchers conduct research to publish. So once the work is finished, they're writing articles and they're publishing articles in journals that are also peer-reviewed. So if there were to be something there that would cause some concern to peer reviewers, that would be exposed through the peer review process or ultimately potentially result in the rejection of an article. But it's an interesting question, and I think this is going to come up more and more.
A good series of questions. And now over to Monsieur Blanchet-Chocat pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je salue les témoins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Adam. Thank you for being here today. I think it's important to put things in context. So in July 2021, the federal government called on NSERC to come up with a risk assessment form. Then in March 2023, that form was expanded to include an in-depth examination of biomedical research projects. What explains that expansion of the risk assessment form? Thank you for the question. Biomedical science is a very sensitive area, of course. And there's a new program that the government is funding. It's a strategic program. Another colleague is here from that program. It's important to have added protection. It's very important for Canada. Thank you. Can you confirm that the risk assessment form is taken into consideration in the same way by all three funding agencies? Well, there are discussions about enhancing the program. That was announced in February of this year, and we expect details to be forthcoming. There's a lot of interest in the area of digital technologies or dual technologies. There's military applications and so on. So from what I understand, the risk assessment form is not the same for all three agencies. There's no consistency across the board. Well, we're in alliance with TIPS and the biotechnology program. So the assessment is done in the same way at NSERC and at SHRC and CIHR. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Baron, you talked about collaboration. The federal government mentioned in February 2023 that they were going to publish a list of universities that were considered risky or of concern. Do you know whether that list has been released? Because it's October 2023 now. We're still waiting to see that list. Perhaps you're the best person to tell us when that list is going to be released. Please be patient. It's coming. Okay, well, we want to help you. What's the holdup? You talked about cooperation. You talked about the Five Eyes. Other countries, we have allies that have made lists. So I'm just trying to understand today how it is that the government said it was going to do something, but we don't know when, and they don't seem to know when they're going to do what they said they were going to do. Well, hopefully it won't be much longer. Okay, well, we'll keep a watchful eye and we'll be patient. Mr. Adam, I have a question for you about Chinese interference. You know, we're going to make a report with recommendations in it. I'm just wondering, in your organization over the past 20 years, has there been any trend that you've detected in terms of rejecting applications for funding involving Chinese researchers or institutions directly or indirectly? Have you had to reject any applications because they were considered of concern to national security? Our risk assessment is done project by project on a case-by-case basis. And their assessments are done by arm's-length neutral agencies, and it's done in the interest of Canadian security. Okay, thank you. I'd just like to clarify things a bit. There are some people who have spoken publicly, people speaking for the 15 largest universities in Canada, and there seems to be a bit of a gray area. David Robertson, our researcher, and representative of professors, said he didn't know why their application had been rejected, and he tried to get some information, and wasn't necessarily getting answers to his questions. So I'll give you a concrete example. Out of the 48 proposals made to NSERC, 34 were refused, 34 were refused, but without any explanation. So you have assessment forms and toolkits and so on, but what can you say about the reasons and the lack of reasons given when an application is rejected? Because researchers try to create partnerships and alliances and so on, but they have no clear instructions about how to go about it. Well, it's an educational process on both sides. we need to understand one another. There has to be a safe lane for research in Canada. That's a new thing that exists in the U.S., for example. I got a grant from the National Security Agency myself, and the system's not perfect, but I think we're doing a better job in Canada, and we're trying to do the best we can for our country.
Much, and Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes to wind us up on this set.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here once again before the committee. Another new interesting topic. I just want to try to get some of the things clear here about the risk assessments, and perhaps any of you can answer, but is it my understanding that the people that have to fill out this risk assessment form are people that are applying for a grant and have a collaboration, was it just with private sector? So if I'm applying for a grant in collaboration with another institution, another foreign institution, is that something that would trigger this assessment?
Right now, it's only the Alliance program, and these are collaborations between academics and industry, right? And those are the ones, but of course, we expect an expansion of that.
And the expansion would expand into other non-private sector institutions?
What has been mentioned are the dual-use technologies and the what do you call them, malevolent entities that we don't want to work with.
So more expanded into different topics of research, like if you were doing any research on certain sensitive topics?
We understand if they're doing research on these sensitive topics and collaborating with those entities, that would be a no-go.
Oh, okay. And for researchers, I mean, not all researchers in universities access funds through the tri-councils. I assume there are many that access other funds. Do you have any idea what percentage of researchers get grants from, say, NSERC or SHRC or CIHR versus getting grants or funding from other institutions or entities?
Well, there's like an intersection, right? I would think that maybe 80 or so percent, 70% of researchers, at least in natural sciences and humanities, in natural sciences and engineering, probably at SHRC also it's quite high, maybe a bit lower there.
Lower?
And CIHR, I know it's a bit lower too.
Yeah.
But what we're doing, there's other sources of funding, of course, MyTax and other entities.
So for those, I'm just trying to get an idea of the research funding ecosystem and what portion of it we're talking about here today.
Yeah.
So there are researchers that either aren't successful when they apply for grants through the tri-councils, or they don't bother, they get funding directly from the private sector or that, and they aren't.
Well, they are not. Of course, we can only do what our agencies do, right? But I think what is true is that the Tri-Council sets the tone and the standards, and in things like plagiarism, open access, et cetera, we set the tone for the whole community, and it's very important that we have clarity in what we do, and so I think it has an impact beyond what we directly fund.
And for instance, the money that was or is being directed at institutions, at universities, to increase their security, I assume that part of that would be going to looking at things beyond Tri-Council granting
Absolutely,
researchers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you talked about the researchers that had to mitigate the risk somehow. I guess that was the 4%. They had to show how they were going to.
The 4% that were referred to the security agencies.
But 96%.
Everyone has to give a plan for mitigating the risk, and then we have to see whether it's acceptably mitigated.
Okay. And what was the percentage that was not at risk at all, or
So
didn't?
96% were fine,
Fine.
but they showed how they would mitigate the risk.
Oh, I see, okay.
There
And
were
then the-
around 2,000 proposals.
Okay, and then the 4%
Yeah.
were the ones that hadn't shown
That's right, and they were referred to the
to
experts.
CSIS and
Yes, because
CES.
we can only use public information. Things are available on the web about, and you learn a lot about entities just by looking things up, right? It's surprising.
1 minute, okay. I'm just wondering how, I'm trying to see how broad this risk assessment is. I mean, in terms of when researchers bring in grad students to work with them, is that part of the risk assessment? Or what happens if they get the funding and then they hire on research assistants or students that in themselves may be a risk? I mean, is there some follow-up or?
I think my colleague, right?
With respect to the national guidelines, national security guidelines on research partnerships, those have been focused on ensuring that the researcher knows the area of research that they're in and where they're sensitive, dual-use technologies, et cetera. That becomes an area of greater sort of consideration, and also their partner. So that has been the focus of the national security guidelines for research partnerships. With respect to forward-going policies, where we await sort of a pronouncement on the scope of that specifically, but that's been the focus to date.
Okay, thank you.
Getting some great information. Mr. Soroka for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses. I'll start off with Mr. Adam. Has NSERC ever been advised by the Canadian Security Agency to terminate or reconsider a research grant involving entities to the People's Republic of China? And if so, what has the Liberal government done?
So we have been advised not to fund certain projects of that kind, but we have not gone retrospectively.
Okay. I'll go to Mr. Barron then. Has your organization had to terminate or reconsider any health research projects involving the PRC entities due to concerns raised by Canadian security agencies, and as well as how did the government respond to this?
Thank you for the question. This has not happened until now. When we looked at the grants CHR funded, we fund 10 grants. In the case of these 10 grants, one person affiliated with this grant has an affiliation with an institution in China, but none of these institutions are actually conducting research in a sensitive technology area.
Okay. I'll go with Mr. Hewitt then. How does the Liberal government ensure that your organization funded research projects involving entities connected to the PRC are in line with Canada's foreign policy objectives, especially considering the sensitive nature of social science and humanities research?
So, I mean, clearly at this point, we are working together to develop the guidelines that will be applied to our areas as they would be applied to any other area. Right now, the screening is restricted to the Alliance program using the tools that have been developed. That may be expanded with the publication of lists or institutions, and we will follow those. To our knowledge, I can't tell you that we are funding organizations and entities that would pose a risk to Canada, or at least have been identified through the peer review process or subsequently. Okay. It's less likely to occur, as I was saying, in the social sciences and humanities, for that to occur just given the very nature of the research, but not impossible, I grant you that.
Now, I think it was Mr. Adam had mentioned that, the government said they're going to bring out new criteria here starting in February, and you haven't seen what they've brought forward yet or what kind of recommendations. Was that more initiated by government or by your organizations?
We're part of government. We're in the ISED portfolio. So I do want to acknowledge that Minister Champagne has been out front on this issue and cares a lot about research security. And we're waiting further instructions to implement these expanded guidelines.
So did you identify any one of your organizations, I don't care, any one of the board that are here today or the witnesses here today, go and say that we need to really address this because we find something glaring and that could be a potential security risk to universities?
Well, early on when I started in this position, we definitely indicated that there were potential issues that we were aware of, and we knew there were folks working on that in the government. And I was, in fact, quite pleased when the new policy was announced and its development, because I think it's very necessary.
But you haven't seen any of the recommendations come from that policy yet?
We're waiting impatiently.
Okay. Do you have a time frame as to, or did the government give you a time frame as to when? Because, I mean, we're talking February. We're almost a year already.
What was it they said in Star Trek? No, it's days and not years.
Okay. That sounds good.
Or light years.
Did you feel that there was any glaring things possibly that could be missed that the government needs to look at, that there could be, loopholes or something there where, like the PRC could work around to still do real research that could help with military operations in their country?
Well, I have mentioned that we will always be tested, right? Let's not be naive. One of the issues here was that the whole ecosystem was extremely naive. I think our government, the folks working there, are really doing an excellent job of trying to mitigate the risk and make it foolproof, but it never is perfect. And in talking to our colleagues, we have a very close relationship with NSF in the United States, and trying to understand what loopholes they potentially see. So it has to be something that has to be constantly tweaked and improved as we see what the results are.
Well, I think, Mr. Hewitt, you brought that up, that you had said if a university goes through all the funding criteria and all the security checks, and yet they do get money, there's never been an issue where it's found that, oh, geez, there is something here that could be a security risk, that funding could be pulled. If it's a brief comment, or it could be a reply later.
For very foundational equipment and software and so forth to maintain security. So it operates at a very basic level to get universities to a place where they can utilize that software or that equipment to screen better. So that's as far as we go in that funding.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. And Mr. Turnbull, for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today on this important topic. It's great to hear your testimony. Just following up on a few other lines of questioning that I thought were fruitful, and maybe just to clarify. So just an estimate, what percentage of funding of all Canadian research does the Tri-Council actually provide? So in the whole market of research across universities and colleges, because I know you do fund applied research at colleges as well, what percentage do you provide? Maybe you could just go through the three of you. Give an estimate.
I can take a crack at it by memory, but the three councils alone are just over $3 billion or so in a system that's probably close to 30. If you include industry, and it may be more, and I apologize, I haven't looked at the latest data, which would see funding from government, in government labs, through industry, for their own research, and from industry to institutions. So it's a
So you're about 10% of the 10% of the total market?
I'm guessing, but I would call it an intelligent guess.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm asking for. Okay. And if you want to follow up with some details, that would be fine. We'd appreciate it. So if you're 10% of the market, the other 90% of the market in terms of research that's going on is either privately funded, it's not within federal jurisdiction because it's not under the Tri-Council.
Some of it would be in government science, in labs and facilities like the National Research Council and so forth.
And whose jurisdiction would that? I'm sorry to cut you off, I don't mean to, but I don't mean to be rude. I just want to get to down to where I'm going here, which is whose jurisdiction is that other 90%?
So of the 90%, a good portion would be industry funding for their own research, and also research that's done in institutions. Provinces fund research as well, which would account for a portion. Universities fund their own research with their own resources as well.
Okay.
So it's quite varied, actually, if you break it down. Statistics Canada has the latest numbers on those, but we're happy to source those and send these to the committee.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Hewitt. So it's interesting because if we think about research security as and taking a holistic approach, your actually share of the portion of research is actually quite small in regards to the whole universe of research that's being funded in Canada. So I'll just leave that. That's my statement, basically what I'm taking from your testimony. Just want to get back to another comment here, which was, I think my colleague, Ms. Jazik, asked you some really good questions, mostly to NSERC, so Mr. Barron. And you had mentioned that about 4% of applications that came in actually, essentially had security risks that were unmitigatable, or at least were in question, and those had to go to the national security agencies. You said that 50% of that 4% were rejected, roughly 30. I'm sorry, I think that was Mr. Adam, sorry. I was getting confused, sorry. So I just wanted to go to the others and say, how many of you that you've had to refer to the national security agencies for review, and how many of those have been rejected? Mr. Barron, maybe I could ask you.
Thank you for the question. At CHR, this process is not in place yet.
Okay.
We have, probably based on the nature of research by CHR, NSERC took a lead position here. But, based on the discussions we've had with our tri-council partners, which were initiated by ISET together with the National Security Councils, we are preparing, steps which will be perfectly synchronized for the agency. We cannot really predict the outcomes, but, based on the nature of research, we can have some guesses. But in the end, we will have to see what comes in and which will follow the new
Well, and just to
guidelines.
follow up on that, so you've profiled mental health, obesity, and degenerative diseases. Those all seem like research partnerships that, for me at least, don't present huge concerns from a national security perspective, perhaps. I mean, I kind of think they might be fruitful areas. Maybe I'm wrong, but those are good examples. Are there examples of ones where you would have concerns?
Thanks for the question. There's actually some areas in biomedical technology, use of genomics technology, use of computer technology in medicine, which could lead to concerns, and which we were discussed. And these are actually discussions we've had between the councils, with our colleagues at ISET, but also with our university partners, which resulted in the guidelines which are about to come out at a date Dr. Adam
and so would those be considered sensitive research areas then in future guidelines? Is that the intention?
There are areas which are in health research which will be on this list, which will be announced at a later date.
Okay, great. Oh, I'm out of time.
Any questions? And Monsieur Blanchet-Joquin for 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais retourner, Monsieur.
2.5 minutes.
Subvention au CRSNG.
Applications for funding were submitted to the SHRC, and out of 1,000 applications, only 4 were assessed, and many of those were rejected. Can you explain that? Well, researchers had to come up with mitigation plans in those cases. But some of the 4%, it couldn't be ascertained whether those measures were sufficient. So they were sent to our colleagues at the security agencies. But 4% is not very much, you'll agree. 4% of 1,000 applications, only in 4% of cases was there an in-depth review. Well, I'll turn it over to my colleague. Thank you for the question. I'll answer in English if you don't mind. Could you send us the answer in writing, please? And I'll move ahead to my next question because I'm running out of time. I'd ask the 3 organizations here today, in connection with this important study, to provide us details of any applications that were rejected because they were considered at risk over the past 20 years because of Chinese involvement. And could you identify the risk analysis process that was used over the past 20 years? I understand that that's a lot to ask for your organizations, but if we're going to produce a good report here, we're going to need some data. And I would say that I've really appreciated what you've said here today, but we still need more data.
I'll be interested to see how that comes through. Now for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Cannings, please.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to try to quickly finish here with try to get an overall sense. We've heard testimony here before of researchers and students, receiving funding from foreign entities, particularly China, that have left them vulnerable for various forms of, I don't know if you'd call it blackmail, but, being, forcing agreements to give up data or, work in concert with these foreign entities. I'm guessing, listening to this, that it would be easier for that nefarious entity to work with researchers that didn't get funding from the tri-councils, or they would be offering much more somehow as an inducement for this. And I guess I'm just wondering if that would you agree with that? Is that something, if I were acting in this manner, I would look for researchers outside the tri-council universe?
I would say more focused pretty much on university-based researchers and their students. I think you have to develop best practices that apply to the whole ecosystem, regardless of where the money comes from. And there are conflict of interest forms that, I have been a professor at UBC. We fill out these conflict of interest forms. There could be more information obtained and guidance and mentoring, so those situations do not arise. So absolutely, but it's something that I think the whole system has to work together on it. And we're just a piece of it.
Yeah.
Although I do want to say that there is research and there is research. And we fund the most exciting research, right, the cutting edge, and that's the one that is the target.
Right, yeah. 30 seconds. Well, so just to finish then, so I'm assuming then that you all work obviously very closely with universities in all this, and that they are doing similar things to all the research that's happening in there.
My colleague is.
If I may address a little bit of that, we've been working not just with universities, but also our colleagues across government on things like the Safeguarding Your Science portal. The questions that you've raised, we're very aware of, in that we only fund a portion of all the research that happens in Canada. So the work that we're doing is also principally focused on raising awareness across the science ecosystem, and universities have been increasingly engaged in that effort and increasingly resourcing within, and including using things like the Research Support Fund that Dr. Hewitt referred to earlier. So there is an awareness, and there is a desire, I think, to work collectively to shore up the ecosystem beyond granting agency funding.
Okay, thank you.
Just to say that the funding that we provide and the way we provide it and the regulations that we implement provide the baseline for all research in many important ways. And we have some great examples in the case of the Secretariat for Research Ethics and Research Integrity, which were developed by the Tri-Council, which are applied evenly by the three councils across the university sector for research that's funded federally or by anybody else. So
Terrific.
there are ways to get to that point with the collaboration, cooperation of the universities, who are actually quite happy to have that as background for their own work. So.
Well, thank you, and thank you for setting the standard, not only in research, but the governance of research. And your testimonies today were terrific. The answers, the questions were terrific as well. So thank you for contributing to this report. We know we can always rely on you, and you always do come through. If there is anything else that comes up, please do submit in writing to our clerk. And for now, we will suspend for a minute while we go into in-camera.
you.